Welcome to Women of the Military Podcast panel series sponsored by Savio Coding Bootcamp. I'm really excited to introduce to you three women who are working to tell the stories of women and talking about why it's so important to tell these stories. Melissa Washington, Lila Hawley, and Rahale Nasri are all storytellers, and they each tell stories of women in a different way through magazine, podcasting, storytelling, and books, and we discuss why and how and what they're doing and why it's important. So let's dive into this interview after a word from our sponsor, Savio Coding Bootcamp. Women of the Military Podcast would like to thank Savio Coding Bootcamp for sponsoring this week's episode. Savio Coding Bootcamp is a top-ranked coding bootcamp that is 100% dedicated to helping smart and highly motivated individuals become exceptional software engineers. Visit their website at www.sabio.la to learn how you may be able to use your GI Bill of benefits to train at Savio. Your tuition and monthly BAH stipend may be paid during your training period. They are also 100% committed in helping you find your first job in tech. So don't forget to head over to www.sabio.la to learn more. And now let's get started with this week's interview. Welcome to Women of the Military Podcast. We're doing a panel focusing on women who are telling the stories of women. So I'm really excited to have my panelist guest here, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So let's start with Melissa first.
Thank you, Amanda. Melissa Washington. I'm a Navy veteran, and I'm also been married to Marine now for 27 years. So being a veteran as well as a military spouse. And 7 years ago, I got about 20 women together at a Mexican restaurant here in Sacramento, California, which started Women Veterans Alliance, and we are now a nationwide organization. And in addition to founding Women Veterans Alliance, I'm also the founder of Women Veterans Giving, which is our nonprofit partner, and recently a co-publisher and founder of Women Veterans Magazine, and I'm very happy to be here.
My name is Lila Hawley. I am an Army veteran and also an Army veteran spouse as well, but more so an Army veteran. I served 22 years. I know. I served 22 years active duty, right? So I got to take credit for that. And since retiring, I have had the awesome pleasure of telling the stories of women veterans through my organization and books, Camouflage Sisters. We just released our 8th publication, and we have told the stories of over 140 women affiliated with the military, and I'm super proud of the work that we have been able to do.
Hi, I'm Rahale Nasri, and I am not a veteran, and I'm not married to a veteran either. But I do tell stories about women, and particularly women who have done some violence, whether it is because they were asked to in the military or just to be able to carry out the things that they wanted to carry out. And so right now I have a podcast called Violent Femme, and I look at different women in history who have been overlooked or villainized because of some of the violence that they did that were probably very similar to some of the things that men do, but are considered heroes. Whereas if it's a woman who's done it, they are sometimes villainized or completely erased from the history books or, overlooked in some way. So that's what I'm doing right now. And it's a narrative podcast. So it's a storytelling podcast. It's not, Q&A or anything like that. But, so I'm telling those stories.
Yeah, and I asked all of you guys here because you're all doing a different aspect of telling the stories, and I really enjoy Violent Femme, the podcast, because it's just, I put it on in the background while I'm working and I listen to the stories and I'm like, these women are amazing. And it's different than Women of the Military because that's me interviewing people and telling their stories. So I really enjoy hearing those stories. And then I'm just excited to have all of you guys here and to dive more into these questions. So the first question I want to ask is, what led you on the path you're on today? And Melissa, you talked about you guys had 20 women, and that was where it started. But what it's grown a lot since then, and what big milestones happened along the way?
With that, so now I'll just backtrack to why I started it. The reason why I started is I was looking for opportunity to network with other women veterans in more of a professional setting. And as we all know, most of the veteran organizations, the traditional ones, are a bunch of old guys, and that's not what I was looking for. I want the opportunity to network with other women, so I'm like, I'll just start my own group. Which again, that was the intent. This was just going to be a local group. Um, and then I didn't realize the need until I started talking to women. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, there is such a need for this connectivity piece, this collaboration with others, because so many women will, when they leave the service, a lot of them are just disconnected, or they just don't, they may not want to be connected. They just don't know how or what. So having this, and then it just continued to grow. I mean, then all of a sudden, now we need a Facebook group. Now we need a website, and it just kept, okay, now is this. So it wasn't like I was creating new things, but it was based upon the need. With that, and then a year later we had the unconference, which we just had our sixth one last year in Las Vegas. And that's opportunity to bring women together, to be able to connect them with each other and resources, which we do on a daily basis, but be able to bring that at, more of mass at scale with that. And that's kind of how it just keeps going. I mean, with the magazine, with the starting the nonprofit, and having, the small business award, it's based upon the need, and listening to others, and really understanding what the need is out there and how I can help fill that need, whether it's me starting that need or collaborating with others to fill that need.
And one quick follow-up question. What led you to start the magazine? You have your organization, you do all the events and the networking. What led you to start the magazine?
So, well, the first couple of years when I started Women Veterans, this was like on my list, right? We all have our, like, I wish I could do this, but I don't have any published experience. Granted, I wrote a book and I published a book, but that's a lot different than a magazine. And the time wasn't right. The time was right last year of being able to collaborate with Christina Wilkinson, who also publishes another magazine. So here I've got the resources, the networking, the information. She's got the publishing. So it's just like it makes sense. It makes sense to everything that we do to be able to bring a print and digital publication, state by state for our women veterans.
What started me on my way was the transition after those 22 years of active duty service. As you guys know, that transition is very emotional. And so for me, I kind of got hung up in that transition, struggled a little bit, and was trying to figure out how to maneuver through that tough time. And so I took to what I knew, and that was journaling. I started journaling just to get the feelings out and trying to process everything. And so I got to thinking about who else was struggling with this. I got to thinking, like, this can't just be me, and this has to be like part of the journey. And so I ended up with those journal entries, self-publishing my first book, Battle Buddy, to help other veterans maneuver through that emotional transition of leaving the military. And then during that time, I also volunteered a lot and talked to a lot of other women veterans, and found that, yeah, that's part of the process. You got to push through. We all struggle a little bit, but we eventually make it through. It's part of our story. And I learned, like Melissa, like, they have some amazing stories when you get to talking to women veterans. They just have amazing stories. And so I started looking for books, and I was like, well, who's telling these stories? It's definitely not us. Like, there weren't any books out there. They weren't being captured. And like you all know, women have accomplished some amazing things in their lives and their military careers. And so I was introduced to my publisher. I told her the idea of doing one book. Just wanted to, share the writing experience. And I knew that there were, health and healing benefits to writing with other women. She thought it was incredible. And she just was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. And when I started asking and started getting yeses, I was like, oh, wow, we've really hit on something here. And so when the first book came out, it was just so well received by the community. as a whole, and then outside of our community as well, like women and individuals just like, this is great what you're doing, capturing you guys' stories. Like, we don't hear these stories. We don't hear them from a woman's perspective. So I knew we was on to something big. And like I said, it started with just one book. That's the only thing I really had in my mind was to do the one book. Then I took it on the road, and like Melissa, once you start talking to other women veterans and you see that there's a need, it's like, hey, I got to go back and do this again and again and again. And here we are 8 books later. And each time I put a call out for co-authors, the women show up, and they really, really leave their hearts on the pages. And not only that, the process of writing, as you all know, is so healing for the writer, but it's also healing for the readers. And the women who read our books, they connect with the stories, they connect with our sisterhood, because we are them and they are us. We even though, you served in the Air Force, Melissa in the Navy, there's so many things that overlap in our stories, the struggles that we endured and came through in our military career. So it connects us. It's our service that, connects us, but it's our stories that really make us a sisterhood. And so it's been an incredible journey. And just hearing these stories, and even the stories like outside of the books that didn't make it to the books, have been so inspirational to me on this journey. I'm just so proud of us as women veterans, and just excited about what we've been able to create with Camouflage Sisters.
So I have worked in theater most of my life, and so I'm a storyteller. I was an actress and a director, and then finally a writer. And much of the theater that I did was political in nature, whether it was about global politics or, so it was related to a lot of different things that I was passionate about. And so when the pandemic hit, you couldn't do any more theater. And I hadn't been doing theater for a while because I had a child. So I decided to tell these stories through podcasting. And I picked these stories because one of the things that I care about is the advancement of women, the number of women who are in positions of power, and gender parity. I feel like in the past 40 years, I feel like it's just been very, very slow. And I don't know why that has been. And I was trying to sort of think of ways that we could look at it differently. And one of the things that I came up with for myself, I thought, well, a lot of times when we're asking for more power, we are actually portraying ourselves as victims. It's like, we're not getting this, we're being abused, and nobody wants to give power to people they see as victims. Whereas men, I feel like, throughout human history, they have gotten all these stories that tell them that they can be heroes. And it doesn't matter what they do. They can make a lot of mistakes. They can do terrible things, and they can always redeem themselves. But women don't really get that. The stories that we get most often, and I'm sure you understand that being in the military, because it's not as acceptable for women to be powerful, to be strong, to be aggressive, to take charge, to do these things. And that's the kind of human I want to be, and that's what I relate to. I don't relate to stories of female sainthood. And so I wanted to tell the stories that I didn't see, and the kind of stories that I thought would help actually give women the freedom to make mistakes, to do, I think there's so many stories about women who falter and then they're ruined. If you make a mistake, you get pregnant, you do something wrong, as a woman, you are bruised, or at least that's what you're told. But men don't get those stories. They get stories where they can always redeem themselves. The redemption story doesn't really exist in anything, whether it's like actual history or literature or on the screen. It doesn't exist. Whereas it's like a huge story. And in fact, a good story, the hero is flawed. So like you can't, the reason sometimes they do stories about women and they're like, well, nobody likes these stories, they're not interesting. Yeah, they're not interesting because they're not real, because you're not really showing real women. You're showing some sort of saint that doesn't exist. So I thought that I wanted to tell the kind of stories that I want to see about women. And they're complex and they're not always good. And, but they can also be heroes in the end. So.
Yeah, I love how all three of you are telling stories in different ways, but we're all empowering women to be inspired by the stories of the women who are sharing their stories, be either from history or from present day. And I really love that. That leads into my next question, which is, why is it important for us to tell these stories?
So, so with telling stories, it helps us build a lot of the trust, right, and the rapport with others. So, like for example, if I came and if I didn't serve, and I started the organization, I think I know having served, it builds that trust and rapport with those women that have served. And again, like Lila mentioned, regardless of which branch we're in, there's a commonality piece, and it's so important to tell that. And and to be able to motivate and inspire others. And I'll let Lila get into the healing part, because that's, I know a lot where hers comes from with the journaling and that stuff. But for us to tell our story and to show, to be vulnerable, and I think that's something we all need to work on, especially as women. We don't want to show that vulnerability, and we can do that through our storytelling, and that we're human just like everybody else there. And like I said, hopefully it'll inspire someone else to, like, okay, well, she can do it. Maybe I can do it as well.
Yeah, vulnerability and the inspiration. I mean, my podcast is all about inspiring the next generation to serve, so that makes a lot of sense.
For us to share information, right? Because again, going back to the whole women part, we don't want to share somebody else because we don't want someone else to might be better than us because we give them something that we have. But just think, if all of us opened up to share what we have, how much we can be just better as a community, as a society, to be able to do that. And I think that's where storytelling comes into, as part of being a better community.
And you said a key word there, Melissa: vulnerability. We don't like that word as military women. So to share our stories, it puts us in a vulnerable place. It's very uncomfortable. But like you said, I feel like the healing aspect of it overrides that vulnerability. And then, like you said, knowing that others will be inspired or even be motivated to seek out their own healing from you sharing their story is really the driving force behind us sharing our stories. I really like what Rahale, am I saying that right? Rahale said about um, telling our stories in the way we want to tell our stories. And that's what my whole purpose was with Camouflage Sisters. We tell the real story. We tell the ugly truth, and we tell our story of redemption. And it was important for me to make sure that the women, when you're telling your truth, you tell your lessons learned. You tell how you overcame that thing, and you tell the reader, because it's going to be other women just like you, what that journey looked like to reach that healing point in on your journey, because they need to know. They need to know it's ugly. They need to know it's hard. They need to know it can be done though. And so that's why we have to tell the real story. Our pillars for Camouflage Sisters are sharing. We're sharing our stories, revealing. We're revealing our truths, and we're healing because of that. We're healing because we're sharing our stories. And I really love what she said about telling our stories in our own way. And that was my main purpose with Camouflage Sisters. I give the ladies freedom to write their story in their own words. A lot of times we don't get that flexibility. We don't get that freedom. And it has also inspired me to create other story platforms, other things that I'm working on for the future, just like what she mentioned, to tell our stories, tell stories of flawed feminine heroes, but they're strong women, and they're doing amazing things, but they have flaws just like any other hero. And why can't we be like that? That's the real human woman. Like that's us. We're all not a size 4. The average woman is probably a size 12 to 14. Like, come on, let's break these stereotypes and let women really live and thrive. And that's why telling our stories is so important.
I think I just want to follow up on what you just said, because I think women have to tell women's stories the way that they want to tell them. And I think one of the reasons this is important is because, first of all, we're underrepresented. There aren't enough women's stories, all kinds of women's stories. But also, up until, recent years, most of our stories have been told by men. That's why we've been portrayed as saints and flawless, because that's what they wanted from us. That is the expectation they wanted. So that's what the ideal was painted for us. That's why we don't get these heroic stories, because they didn't want the women to be heroes. They wanted the men to be heroes in these stories. And if there was a hero and she was able to defeat a man, that was also, brushed under the rug, because they don't want to be seen as someone who has been defeated by a woman, no less. So I think all of that is just so much missing. There are so many stories, there's so many lives that we don't get to see, because even when it has been portrayed, it has been generally, for the most part, I know there are, there's so many responses sometimes I get. They're like, oh, it's 2022, things have changed. No, they haven't changed much, and they haven't changed enough. And so in order to show the complexity of women's lives, and also, like what Melissa was saying, it's important for them to be told so that people can share information. Like, there's so many things about even womanhood that I feel like there should have been a million stories out there for me that I just didn't know. I didn't know about until I come across it. We don't know about lots of different stages in our lives because women don't share as much, because it's seen as unseemly to share these things. And I think we have to sort of wipe away that sense that, this is ugly, this is not, women's menstruation, menopause, all this stuff is not okay. I've always just talked about it. And what I hate is that it has to end up being shocking to somebody. It shouldn't be shocking. It's a part of our lives. I think the representation matters, and as much more of it as we can get.
Yeah, that was great. I loved how you guys all touched on the vulnerability piece, and then the importance of the stories and how much they matter for representation. So what is the process for telling the stories that you've been telling? So you each have a different area of focus. Like, a magazine is very different than writing a book and a podcast. So where do you go? What is the way that the process that you go through to tell these stories?
So with me, and I'm just going to put a quick plug in because I have a new book that I collaborated on to tell my story. So I was invited to collaborate with 21 other women, and there's only 2 women veterans in the whole book. And so I get to have a chapter on perseverance, telling my story, how, I built and empowered the community, which Women Veterans Alliance. And one of the reasons I wanted to tell this story is I wanted to start telling our story outside of our own community. Right, we're doing good things in our community now. I want to get it outside of our community. I want to bring that awareness, and also too, as we look at the narrative, right? And we, especially as women veterans, we know even just the veteran narrative can be so negative. So I think it's so important for us to tell our stories about that. So that was just a quick plug for myself on my personal storytelling. But also, I want to use my platform, use my connections, use what I have to be able to help other women share their stories. And one of the ways that I do that is through our unconference, which Amanda and Lila, both of you have experienced the unconference. So it's, giving women the opportunity to come and speak, to be presenters there, to be the opportunity to connect with others. And again, having that experience to do so. And also, we have our Wednesday webinar series, which we're going to be launching, which will launch the first Wednesday of March. Again, giving women veterans opportunity to tell their stories. It's not just selling their business. Some women may not even have a business. They just want the opportunity to share their story to inspire others. And I want to be able to give them the opportunity to, again, use what I have, and let me be that portal to help amplify her and empower her. And that's exactly what we do. And also another thing is, on our website, which both of you are in our store, and both of you have sold books in our store, we have the opportunity for women veteran authors to sell their books in our store. Again, let us help amplify, what you're doing, create another sales funnel, another channel for you. Yes, that's it.
Yeah. So, as you know, writing books is it's pretty emotional, actually. Writing a book, and like I mentioned earlier, allowing yourself to be vulnerable to tell your story, because our Camouflage Sisters anthologies are real life stories. Like, these are real life stories that we lived through, you know. And what's always amazing to me is that we always have women who share a piece of their story that they've never shared before, like surviving domestic violence or a sexual assault or some type of traumatic event in their life, um, trying to fit into the boys club, or being passed over for promotion, or whatever their story is, they have chosen to tell. Is In our Behind the Ranks series, I've given them free reign to tell that story. We have 5 books in that series, and then in our Camouflage Sisters series, we have 3 um, topic books. So we have a book on uh, the Black woman's story of service, and we focus heavily on mentorship in that book. That's our first book. We have Silent No More, which talks about surviving traumatic experiences, and then we have our leadership book, which tells the stories of senior leaders. And so it's always interesting to for the ladies to see their words come back to them, and they're very emotional behind it, because once I go through my initial edit with them, and we get it to probably the 90-95% solution before we send it off to our editor, they're very emotional, because they're really, like you mentioned earlier, they're really putting themselves in a vulnerable position to tell this piece of their story. And it's only one chapter, but it's still their story. It's still them opening themselves up for the world to see. This is what I experienced. This is what I survived through. This is how I dealt with it, and this is what I learned from it. And I'm still standing, and that's the main thing. That's what I remind them of: is you're still standing, and you're still here to tell this story. And just if one person inbox you and says thank you for sharing that. You just gave me the courage to leave this abusive relationship. You just gave me the courage to go seek mental health um, services to get through what I experienced in my military career. Whatever, it's worth it. Like, those are the women that we write for. And so during the process, I always remind my co-authors that, like, think of the woman that you're writing for. She's going to inbox you. She might not, you know, toot your horn loud and proud on social media, but she's going to be the one to inbox you and say, hey, thank you so much. Your story really, really touched me in this special way. And I found the courage to find my own healing. And so that's why we write. That's who we write for. It helps us as well as women. Like she mentioned, I was over here laughing because she was talking about things that we should know about. Rahale mentioned those topics that we don't talk about, that we should be talking about. And when I came up on menopause, I was like, why didn't anybody warn me? I'm going through the early stages, but still, it's a journey, and we as women need to be able to talk about these things. And so what we do with Camouflage Sisters is not just books, it's an actual community that we've created now. We meet once a month, and we have our sisterhood chat. We focus heavily on self-care, because as women, a lot of times we put everybody else's needs and priorities before our own, and we don't do a good job of taking care of ourselves. So we really, really harp heavily on self-care during our sisterhood chats, and it's our safe space to vent and laugh at ourselves and talk about those topics that are kind of taboo to talk about in the restaurant in the open public forum. So we do talk about challenges in our mother-daughter relationship. We talk about those changes as we transition through womanhood, and we talk about a lot of different things, but we do talk heavily about self-care and what it means to take care of ourselves. And so yeah, we have to create spaces for us to tell all of our story. Like, we as women we're so layered, and there's so many dynamics to our story. one chapter in the book is not going to cover it all. So continue to stay connected to, I would challenge your listeners to continue to stay connected to a sisterhood of women who understand you, understand what you've been through, understand your journey, a place where you have, where you feel safe sharing your story. Make sure that they're creating that space for you, and a place where, you're going to be free to be you. That's one thing that I really, really um, pride myself on when we get together as Camouflage Sisters, because before the pandemic, we used to get together and march in the National Memorial Day Parade, and we'll be able to do that again this year. And every time we got together, it was just amazing to see the groups that connected it within, like a Marine and a Navy woman would get together, and two Army women would connect and never served together or never met each other before, but they just find something that connects them. And it was just so beautiful to see the ladies come together in that manner. And so we don't get hung up on rank. We don't get hung up on your branch of service. We crack our jokes now. We do clown each other, but we don't get hung up. No branch of service is any better than the other. Nobody's experiences is any higher than the other. We're all women at that point. We're all women. We're all women who served, and we come together in support of each other. And it's just a wonderful thing to see, and just a beautiful experience for me. So I'm just I feel so fortunate to have this platform to be able to create these different levels and different opportunities for us to share our stories. It started with the books, but it has grown to so much more. And I'm just so honored to be a part of this sisterhood with these women.
The process for me is, first picking some women. I have a huge list of women on it, many in the military, or who, some of it was so long ago. Like there's like 600 BC woman Tomris, who was a military woman. She was a queen, but she also led the army. But yeah, I picked the women, and then I did 4 for the first series, and I have 4 more coming in the spring. It's a long process because I have to do a lot of historical research, and I also have to sort of figure out what about the history is actually wrong. What is it that is actually propaganda that white men wrote? Because these are about women from all over the world, but the history was written usually by a British white man. So I have to figure out what is true and what is not true, and what might have been the actual truth. They're sort of like, I think of them as mini movies, because I tell the story like a storyteller, and sometimes I act out different parts. But yeah, for me, it's like a film, but an audio version from beginning to end, and it takes a lot of work. And so I write the story first, and then I have to record it, and then there's some post-production. But yeah, I think for me, the initial choice of the women is also really important, because I want to, at the end of each episode, I have this commentary that sort of brings it into the present for us, and how it relates, and why this story is important today. Like, for instance, Tomris, who defeated Cyrus the Great, nobody really knows about her, and she defeated and killed somebody who was the leader of the free world in his time, the Persian Empire at that time. And like Stephanie St. Clair was this woman from Harlem in the 1920s who fought against bullying cops in that period. Like, she used the media, in essence, to publish newspaper articles and ads to call out police officers who were taking bribes or mistreating people of her race. Qing Shi, who was this pirate who was, as far as I can tell, the most successful pirate in the history of the world, had like 80,000 men and 1,800 ships, more than any. And I'd never even heard of this pirate. She ran it like a business. And so I sort of bring it to the present by talking about like what size a company would it be today? Because she had like subsidiaries and joint ventures. She, was negotiating with the British government, the Chinese government, like as if she was her own nation. And nobody really knows much about her. So, and I bring it to the present by talking about the size of company that it would be. It would be the size of Google or Delta today. And that's what I want to do with all of the stories, I guess. That's part of the process in making the choice. Somebody who didn't just commit violence, but could be lauded or a hero in some way, and also connected to something that is going on in our lives, and sort of highlighting the fact that things haven't changed that much. And if we knew these stories, if we knew more about the stories, that maybe we wouldn't make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important that we know the stories of women, because it'll help empower the next generation of women, and it'll help us to not make the same mistakes that we've made in the past, because especially the past that we didn't know the history. I mean, I listened to almost all the podcast episodes, and I was like, I don't know any of these women, and they have these amazing stories. And so I really agree. What is something that you've gained from telling the stories of women that you didn't expect to happen when you started this journey?
I guess a lot of it's just understanding the similarities, but I mean, bottom line for me, it's friendships. I mean, the friendships that I've gained um, from doing this. I think a lot of it's just unexpected, right? You don't expect to start something by telling your story that you're going to gain friends from that, and however that level of friendship that is. And and to go back to what Lila was saying, yeah, you get those people that tout you on social media, but I'm telling you, the most powerful ones come from that text or that email someone says. It says, you know what, I just saw you speak, or I just read your something, and how powerful that is. And those are the ones you remember. Those, and that's kind of one of those unexpected things that you get from being able to, from telling your story, or just that hearing that you shared something and now somebody else is doing something because they heard what you've done. I mean, yeah, it changed the way they think, but now they've actually taken action, right? And to do that, and that's actually just gives me goosebumps, because I just start to think of things that have, and people have shared with me, and things that have happened because of that. And now you've empowered them, and now they're gonna it's gonna continue, right? And that's again making sure we're having those stories so people do know, and they know the truth, right? It's not something that's been changed or changed so it could be better for public consumption, right?
Well, I've gained this amazing sisterhood. Actually, it has grown and grown and grown. We serve, and I served 22 years. I had a long career. I knew a lot of amazing leaders during that time, but the growth of my network after leaving, and because of what I'm doing with Camouflage Sisters, has grown so much, and it's been incredible. I met Melissa. I've been inspired by her and what she's doing out there in California. I'm like a real cheerleader for her. and our friendship has grown too. And you too, Amanda, meeting you and watching what you're doing, and being inspired by you as well, and supporting you and what you're doing. Like, to me, that means a lot to me. And having the same come from you all as well. So a lot of times the Camouflage Sisters, they'll cheer me on and talk about everything I've done for them, and I tell them all the time. I say, you guys say that, and I appreciate the kudos. I really do. I don't minimize them at all. I said, but you guys have. I mean, I let them know you do so much more for me than what you give me credit for doing for you. That you I may not even be able to put it into words sometimes. It just, they do so much for me, to first be accepted into the sisterhood, to be, a valued partner on this journey with them, to be, call their sister in arms, just to have the stories that we could sit and chat together and laugh over. Like me and Melissa, we get together, we always find something funny to laugh about in our career and on this entrepreneur journey. And it's just, those are the times that I cherish the most. I cherish them all, but that, those intimate times with the ladies, with the when they're telling me, how much I mean to them, but I also get the opportunity to tell them how much they mean to me as well. And that, wasn't surprising, but I guess it was surprising how emotional it makes me.
Yeah, I mean, it's along the same lines. I think what's really surprising to me is how starved women are for stories where, like, you're glorifying women, and not just like perfect women, but glorifying really messy women with messy lives. And you were talking about it, Lila, about the inbox, getting messages from people who have such a visceral connection to it and emotional reaction. And I can understand that, because I remember the few moments when I've seen women on film or something do something great, or like represent humanity in a way that most of the time it's a man doing it. So I think that's been really surprising, how much they need it. And then on the heels of that, it's then having a sense of obligation to do more, to create more of, to tell more of these stories, because there's so many of them. But for me, it's a lot of work and it takes time, and I want to do it, but I feel now a sense of obligation to do it, because who else is going to do it? We have, even if so many other women do it, it's still not enough right now. I don't know that we'll ever have enough. And so for me, it's, in a sense, a goal to like overcorrect, because we're never actually going to overcorrect. But if we shoot for that, maybe we'll get somewhere in between.
Yeah, and that goes really good into my last question, which is, what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about either telling their story or telling someone else's story? What advice would you give them?
A lot of it has been talked about in terms of being vulnerable, and being messy, allowing yourself to be. The problem we have a lot of times is, because a lot of the stories that women are told is that you can't make any mistakes. It's hard to share these stories because we don't want to make mistakes when we do it. Whereas men have been conditioned to be able to make so many mistakes. They're like groomed for everything. And for everything, they're allowed to make mistakes, because in order to achieve the things that they need to achieve, they're expected to make those mistakes, and women are not. So the way to go about it is to make women feel that they can make the mistakes and not worry about being judged in telling these stories. And it's a really difficult thing to convey, because we've been conditioned in such an opposite way. But I think just be fearless and don't worry about what other people think. Honestly, what people think generally has to do more with them than with you. So just put it out there. Anything anybody thinks negatively about you says a lot more about them than it does about you. And it's a hard thing to learn, but it's the truth.
Well, no, I'm glad you went before me, because I concur with 100% of everything, that exactly what you have said. Whether it's the being fearless or us being conditioned, but as you can start to see stronger women, more women, women of color, just it's there. I mean, and this is whether you want to call it the movement, we've been in that, but just, so my advice would be, find someone, right? But also too, don't say, well, I'm not going to connect with her because she's a best-selling author. Well, that's fine, but But guess what? We all started somewhere. We all just didn't, we just didn't pop out the womb and we're, the superstar already kind of thing. So it's like we've all started somewhere, and you have to think of people like that when you do want to find someone to connect with. And whether it's writing a book or writing a blog or doing a podcast, I mean, there's so many different avenues we have to be able to tell our story. And we've all had that experience, right? It started here, and then one other thing led to another and led to another. We all start somewhere.
I absolutely agree with both of you. And I chuckled a little bit too, especially when Melissa was talking, because I always get that. Oh, I didn't want to connect with you, bro, because this, that, and the other. And I'm like, what? I'm just the nicest person you're going to meet. Now, maybe not the nicest person, but I am pretty nice. But I always tell people, like Melissa said, make the connection, reach out. You never know what. It's amazing to me when you ask the question or tell somebody what you're wanting to do, how willing people are to give you advice or, share their experiences on their journey or share resources with you. That's going to make it a little bit easier. Like, we don't go through this for our own. Your story and your journey and your experiences are not just for you. They're for you to share with the world, for those who want to go behind you, for our daughters, share them with our daughters. My daughter watches me all the time, and she's like, she's in college now, and the feedback she gave me, we just went through a brand refresh for Camouflage Sisters, and I was a little concerned because I was like, oh, I don't want it to be too girly, too feminine. My brand manager, she was like, oh, come on, just embrace the new look. And I was like, I don't know. And my daughter was like, I really like the new website. I really love it because, women in the military are always made to be strong and this and that, and no softness to them or no feminine to them or whatever. And Camouflage Sister gives the exact mix that is needed for women to feel like women, but still feel strong from their military experience. And I was like, wow, thanks for that feedback, because I was struggling there. And, she gave me what I needed, and me being an example for her is giving her what she's needing. And she has her whole education plan and her whole life planned ahead of her. And I'm so proud of her. And like, she's fearless, and I'm just so inspired by her. And so for us to step out there, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be, you're not going to have days where you're afraid. Or I know I've vented to Melissa plenty of times with, fear or frustration or whatever, wondering if anybody hears me yelling from the rooftop. But, I'm happy for the connection, because she encourages me, I encourage her, and we lift each other up. And so you got to make connections. You got to do it afraid. And like Rahale said, it's needed. It's necessary. I just signed up for her podcast. I'm so excited to start listening to them, because I'm like, I wrote down names. I'm like, who are these women she's talking about? I can't wait to start listening to them, because I want to be inspired by them. I want to hear their stories. I'd sent the link to my daughter. And so, this is why we do this, because and this is why it's needed, because we get excited to hear about us. We get excited to hear about what we're doing. I got excited when Amanda even thought of me to be a part of this panel discussion. Like, our stories are important, and we as women have to let women know that your story is important, my story is important, our collective stories as women are important to share. And so I'm just so humbled to be a part of this panel discussion, and just to learn about what everybody's doing, and be able to support you in your efforts and in your journey. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being part of this discussion. I think it's been really good. We've gotten so many different perspectives, past history, different ways of telling stories, and I hope that if you're listening, you're encouraged to tell your story and to listen, read, find, connect with Melissa, Lila, and Rahale. Thanks so much for watching this week's video. If you like this video, please like it. And if you want to hear more stories of military women, please subscribe to Women of the Military. And you can check out more military stories on Women of the Military podcast. If you have any ideas or topics for future videos that you would like me to cover, please put them in the comments and I will get back to you and try and make those videos happen. Thanks so much for watching and for supporting Women of the Military.